Good morning and welcome to another video on the Off-Road Trails and Tales channel. Today we're going to do a road down in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And you probably already know that the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is on the eastern border of Tennessee and the western border of North Carolina. The road that we're going to do is called Parsons Branch Road. It's an 8-mile point-to-point road on the western end of Cades Cove Loop. The Cades Cove area is a very popular area for tourists. The road goes over the mountains and connects with Highway US 129, popularly called the Tail of the Dragon. Now, there are already a lot of nice videos out there about Parsons Branch, so why do another? Well, these are kind of fun to do to begin with, but I like to focus on some incidences and facts that you may not have seen in the other videos. For example, a hiker was walking along this road, the Parsons Branch Road, and encountered a murdered woman's body. Talk about some of the bear incidences in the park and why the road is there to begin with. So let's get on the road. Here's a map of the western section of the park with some annotations since the lettering is small, but showing you where the start of the Cades Cove Loop is, that red road. At the western end of that red road, there is a gravel road that goes south and connects to Parsons Branch Road, which ultimately connects with US 129. I also pointed out where Rabbit Creek is, which will have some significance later on in the narrative. Our Jeep was a 2025 Jeep Wrangler. We are now just leaving the Cades Cove parking lot. It's at the beginning of the 11-mile loop close to the Cades Cove camping ground. Now, many of you have been here before. You know that the loop is very popular with visitors. It takes about 2 hours or more to get around the 11-mile loop. There are several homesteads, cabins, barns, churches, and a mill along the route. Often you can see some deer and occasionally some bear and wild turkeys, of course. Those tend to cause some problems because people tend to want to stop and take pictures, get out of their cars. And indeed, we did come to a full, complete stop. A very long line of vehicles ahead of us. There were some bears, a mama bear and 3 cubs that people wanted to stop and get pictures of, and here they are. So it took us about 40 minutes to go from here, about 4 more miles to the trailhead. And so here we are at the trailhead for Parsons Branch Road. A little later than we had hoped for, but such is life. We did air down to 25 psi, probably not necessary. The road is easy to begin with. It's early in the season, so it's in good shape. Later in the season, it does tend to get a little rutted because of the rain during the season and a lot of traffic. Now you might well ask, why is the road called Parsons Branch? The simple answer is because it follows Parsons Branch stream on the western end of the road. Now, of course, that doesn't really answer anything, but why is the stream called Parsons Branch? One theory was that it was named after a local family that lived in the area, but as far as I could find, there's no record of a family by that name living in Cades Cove nor in the surrounding area. So another theory that's promoted by one person and seems to have a little more logic behind it and support is that it's just named after a occupation, the occupation of being a parson, and that does seem to follow some of the other naming conventions around here. There is a mill creek, there's a farmer creek, there's a preacher's creek, there's a forge creek, so maybe that is the most logical explanation. As mentioned at the beginning, the road is 8 miles long, relatively narrow. It's one way, gravel and dirt, surrounded by pretty thick forests. It's closed in winter from about November through April. One fun part of driving this road is that there's about 18 water crossings. Of course, it depends on how much rain there has been, so when we drove this road. It had not rained for probably not rained much anyway for about a month. So actually some of those water crossings were dry, and all those water crossings are actually concrete lined to reduce the amount of erosion and silt kicked up. The streams are very clear in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, very good for trout, and so the park wants to maintain that clarity of the water. Now, as you know, off-roading here in the east is a little different from off-roading out west. This is much more rainfall here in the east and a much higher density of trees on average, and those trees can and do with some regularity fall on the road due to just decay of the trees and wind events. And in fact, this road was closed for 6 years from 2016 to May of 2022 due to the danger of falling trees. It was at that time there was an invasion of this insect, hemlock adelgid, which just decimated the hemlock trees in the park. So the park staff tabulated, did a survey along 1 mile of road and counted 1,700 dead hemlock trees. So the park closed the road and hired a contractor to remove those dead trees. Contractor was for $150,000. And over that 6-year period, interesting, half of those trees just fell by natural, well, not natural causes, but fell because they've been killed by this invasion of the adelgids. At the time, the park also took advantage of having the road closed to do some needed repairs. They graded the road, improved the drainage, they replaced 16 culverts, then brought in a bunch of gravel. Here is some more interesting history about the road that I hope you will enjoy. Well, why is this road here rather than somewhere else? Apparently, this route was a footpath used by Cherokees and by hunters, and later used to move livestock by the settlers in the Cades Cove area. And then even later than that, improved a little bit to be a rough wagon trail through the mountains. In 1838, an actual road was constructed that allowed the residents of Cades Cove better access to markets and trade routes that were connected to the Little Tennessee River. Because Cades Cove, if you've been there, you know that it's very isolated. It's surrounded by mountains. So at that time, a trip to the market could take days. So the Parsons Branch Road was very important for farmers to be able to move livestock, and corn, apples, and other products, and bring in products, tools, etc. And boy, it's hard to imagine the work it took to build the original roads using pickaxes and shovels and blasting powder and animal teams. So if you do drive the road, think about all the work of those people and settlers to build that road, and the arduous path to go to market before the road was built about 190 years ago. So essentially, this is a preserved road from another era. To change the subject a little bit, if you are interested in finding out a little bit more about the difficulties that people have found themselves in the park, David Brill has written a very interesting book called Into the Mist, Tales of Death and Disaster, Mishaps and Misdeeds in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And he talks about a lot of events over the years in the park, including in the early 90s, there was a very bad blizzard, unexpected, and it caught over 100 campers and hikers in high elevations, found themselves in very, very, very cold temperatures and several feet of snow, including there was a very large group of outward bound kind of students from up farther north that were stranded and using Army helicopters to try to find these people, etc. But one incident that interesting to mention because we're going along Parsons Branch is that in 1976 a hiker was walking along the road and just happened to notice the body of a woman about 40 feet off the road. Went down to investigate and found a lot of blood on her clothing, and she had been shot and murdered, and her body just dumped here. A nationwide effort finally identified the woman as being from out of state, and the murderer had dumped her body here, hoping that it would decompose long before anybody could find her. So if you drive the road, it just does give one pause to realize that, yeah, there's been incidents like that. And by the way, the place where the body was found was along Rabbit Creek, and we've been paralleling Rabbit Creek on the right since about 2 miles into the trail. And actually the first stream crossing that we'll come to, as far as I can tell, is Rabbit Creek crossing. And here we are at the first stream crossing, which again, as far as I can tell from a topo map, is Rabbit Creek. We're probably about 40% into the trail. At times it does feel like you're driving through a tunnel of trees if you use your imagination a little bit. The trees in this forest they include white oaks, tulip poplar, which is the state tree of Tennessee, maple, and others. Along the stream corridors, they used to be lined with hemlocks, but those are now gone. The park was somewhat concerned about losing those shade trees on the stream because then maybe the water would warm up a little bit, which would not be good for trout. There are a lot of rhododendron and mountain laurel. You can see a little stand here on the left, not really not a little stand, and those tend to bloom in late spring, early summer. Show a couple pictures here. Took these photos a year ago at the end of May, but here's a mountain laurel bush and a close-up of the flowers. A lot of rhododendron in the area also. This is kind of a far away photo. You can see the purplish flowers. The area is very famous for the trillium flower, the 3 petals of the trillium, and I think these are just some wild irises. I can't see them very well. Coming up is the trailhead for Gregory's Ball, which goes off to the left. It's a fairly popular trail, so you see several people parked here to take the trail. This also marks more or less the high point of the trail, so we'll pretty much be starting downhill from here. The Great Smoky Mountains is the most visited national park in the U.S., with more than 12 million visitors a year. It is also the national park with the greatest biodiversity, with more than 19,000 species of animals, plants, fungi, etc., including 1,600 black bear that live within the park's boundaries, and that requires a lot of resources of the park. Other animals, though, besides the black bear are white-tailed deer, wild turkeys, coyotes, and so forth. But there's no wolves apparently in the park. It is also known as the salamander capital of the world. A good number of people do come to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park to fish for brown trout and rainbow trout, although I've not seen anybody fishing along Parsons Branch Road. I think people who come here to fish probably go to the larger and more accessible streams. The rainbow and brown trout, though, are not native to this area. It's rather the brook trout that's the one that's native. However, in the late 1800s, I think, and the early 1900s, the brown trout and rainbow trout were stocked in order for fisher people to come and fish for them, and they just outcompeted the native brook trout. The fisheries people here in the park are just world-renowned for their knowledge of the trout in this area, and they have done a lot of work to restore those trout. In fact, we worked with them for years monitoring water quality in the park. Unfortunately, the brook trout, since they cannot outcompete the brown and rainbow, the brook trout can only be restored in the upper elevations in the park where they have a more competitive advantage. And here is another stream crossing, which begins a series of stream crossings between here and Highway US 129. I mentioned earlier that about 1,600 black bear live within the park according to the park's estimates, but surprisingly only one person has been killed in an attack ever since the National Park Service was established in 1916, or since the park itself was dedicated in 1934. That one unfortunate death occurred in May 2000 when a hiker accidentally encountered a particularly aggressive black bear mom and her cub. They were later determined to be undernourished, which may have contributed to the attack. The hiker wasn't doing anything wrong, they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The two bear actually were causing problems a couple weeks beforehand with campers and hikers. So although there's only been one death, there has been numerous incidences of people getting bitten or scratched by bears, but that was almost always the people being doing things that they ought not to do. The park does go to some great efforts to try to discourage people from getting too close or trying to feed them. Just mention again that these stream crossings usually have considerable more water, but there has not been much rain for the last month or month and a half. Hard to tell, but I believe there's actually a concrete pad here that would often have water flowing over it, but too dry now. The geology along these roads is always interesting, and along Parsons Branch is primarily sandstone, some slate, formed about 800 to 545 million years ago. I believe it is correct to say that the geology in the park generally is sedimentary rocks such as sandstone, shale, mudstone, but not totally. And one characteristic of the geology is that there is very little carbonate formation such as limestone and dolomite. And it's those formations that have the ability to neutralize acid from acidic deposition, acid rain, acid snow. In the past, that acidic deposition has come from power plants in the Ohio Valley and around the region, vehicular traffic on interstates, trucks, cars, etc. The emissions from power plants has, of course, gotten much better in the last few decades due to regulations of the Environmental Protection Agency. But the concern is still there, and the park does considerable monitoring of water quality in cooperation with the University of Tennessee and a lot of volunteers from Trout Unlimited. That monitoring includes looking at storm events. The park has several stations where they continuously monitor the quality of the pH and the turbidity and the water level in the streams. So that effort will continue. I would finally mention that the Great Smoky Mountains National Park has really been a model for natural resources management and science, and these people are just really good at their job and very well recognized internationally. Well, this is the end of Parsons Branch Road. Up ahead is US 129, popularly called the Tail of the Dragon. The Dragon is a bucket list ride for many motorcyclists and sports cars because of the many curves and going through beautiful mountain scenery, but notoriously dangerous. And in fact, 2 people died a week after we drove this road. A driver was driving his motorcycle, tricycle, and lost control. And in fact, in the last month and a half, there has been 18 reported accidents, 12 of them with injuries. But can show a little bit of the road so one can see why it's so popular. I do hope you enjoyed watching this video, and if so, please give it a thumbs up. It is always nice to have something to look forward to at the end of the trail, and this is our favorite brewery in Alcoa, Tennessee, the Black Horse Pub and Brewery, where we had a very delicious hamburger and sweet potato fries and a Coca-Cola. Sorry I don't have a photo to show you.